right, there we go. All right, so we're going to talk about Taoism tonight, and if we can work it in and it doesn't take us too long, we'll throw in Confucianism and Shinto because they are kind of in the same, well, they're in the same part of the world, but they have close relationships. So with that in mind, I just want to remind you again the whole piece that we're talking about here, and that is that we are here to be ready to give a reason for what we believe, and sometimes the way to do that well is to understand what other people are thinking, where they're coming from, what they believe, where they've been, what their questions are. And so this will hopefully give you some more insight into what we're doing. With that in mind, I just want to remind you of where we're at in the world. Last week we were in Buddhism, which started here in India, this part of India. And now we're going to go across into China, where Taoism had its beginnings, and Confucianism, which came out of China, and then Shinto, which is started in Japan, which is a religion of Japan. I put this here to show you the mountain ranges so that you can see why some things are kind of separated from each other. Water and mountains tend to separate people, at least they did a couple thousand years ago, and so I wanted you to see that. So with that, we will start talking about Taoism, and in case you think that's a little strange that we should be talking about something, it has become a very significant part of our culture through all kinds of things, but here's a couple of examples. The Tao of Pooh, in which the author draws parallels between the story of Pooh Bear and his little friends Piglet and all those guys, and the whole concept of Taoism. And then there's another book that's been out, still in print. It's been in print for quite a long time, The Tao of Physics, in which the author puts parallels between modern physics and Eastern mysticism. And I think we were talking somewhere along the way that if you read Stephen Hawking's, the famous physicist or astrophysicist, I guess would be the best way to say it, who wrote the book A Brief History of Time, a lot of his conclusions have significant parallels or could almost come out of Taoism and Eastern religions. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that those things are out there. You can go to Barnes and Nobles or any other bookstore, Amazon, and find the copies of these books. They're pretty popular and people delve into them quite a lot. So where did all of this come from? Well, early Chinese thought was good to bring forward the concept of yang and yin. Yang is the male side of the Tao, and if you've picked up already, I have spelled it differently here. It's pronounced with a D, according to our friends in China, but it's often spelled with a T. You'll find it both ways. English likes to use the T instead of the D, and so because of that, you'll sometimes hear it pronounced Taoism, but the Chinese people prefer the D sound. So Yang is the male side of the Tao, which is they equate with anything that's bright and warm and dry. And then there's the yin side of the Tao, which is equated with the dark and the cool and the moist. And they classify just about everything as either having mostly yang or mostly yin. It speaks to the duality of the universe, in which they see a lot of positive and negative, and that's just the way things are. They don't talk so much about good and bad like we do, but it's more positive and negative. The classic text for Taoism is the I Ching, and it's the most important. They have quite a few things that they look at, but the I Ching is the most popular and most important. You can find that at Barnes and Nobles or any other bookstore pretty easily too. Um, the whole idea of Taoism arises out of animism, which is the understanding that there are spirits or a spirit in the world of nature. There are good spirits, which Taoism calls the Shen, and bad spirits, which the Taoists call the Kui. And they also participate in what they would call the worship the spirits of the dead, which is a lot about what you would read in the I Ching. It's very important for them to have connection with the altar of heaven, and the physical representation of that is in Peking, in China. And here's a picture of it. If you see that, you'll probably go, "Oh, I've seen a picture of that before." And this is the outside of the temple. It's very large. You can tell by the size of the people there how large it is. And here's a picture of the inside of it. I would invite you to kind of remember this going forward, because you're going to see another picture in the following weeks that is going to remind you of this picture. Okay.
How old is that building?
It goes back to, I want to say, like the 5th century, 4th
Wow.
6th century. It's pretty old, but then it's also been refurbished, and they take very great care of it. It's a wholly important place for them. So go ahead.
If you go to Epcot Center, you can see a duplicate.
Oh yeah, I've not. We didn't go there, did we? Okay, yeah, we went to the Epcot Center, but we didn't make it there. Yeah, is it a life-size one, or is it a scaled version, Patrick?
I remember seeing it, but I didn't know enough about it to ask those kinds of questions.
Okay, yeah.
But I remember seeing it at Epcot Center.
Yeah. Okay, I'll have to keep that in mind. I think we were just outside because they had the show of the drummers and the dancers was going on, but we didn't go inside. So Taoism has been around before recorded history for the Chinese people practiced, but Taoism, as we understand it today, could be said to have a founder, especially when it comes to the systematizing of it, the writing about it, the description of it. And the founder's name is Lao Tzu. And he wrote a classic writing book thing called the Tao Te Ching, in which he puts all of those ideas forward. It's a fairly lengthy treatise or explanation. If you're interested, you can take a look at it at this website. I forgot to check this when I put this up to make sure it's still an active page, but it was a couple years ago, so I'm guessing it still is. The word itself, Tao, means the way, and that stands for the cosmic force that's behind all phenomenon. So if you've seen Star Wars, you'll understand the whole idea of the force. And that's where that kind of comes from, is out of Buddhism and Taoism in the Eastern religions. And I think I've mentioned that before. What's important about the Tao is to understand the nature of it. They would say to us that it's imperceptible, it's indiscernible, it's formless, and it's nameless. And that they capture that idea by making this statement: if you have named or explained or understood the Tao, then it's not the Tao. And our Western mind kind of does a little glitch there and says, okay, so how do you know if you've arrived? Well, they would say it lies outside of categories, all categories, and nothing can be predicted about the Tao. It basically happens to you. You put yourself in a place of harmony with it, but it's not something you can say, I'm almost there. It happens because you've done all the right things. It defies description as non-being. Even saying that it's a non-being uh, for them doesn't make any sense. It's less than or more than non-being. It's a primordial, undivided state underlying all being and non-being. And for us in Western culture or in Christianity, the whole concept of non-being doesn't make much sense to us at all, because we believe that we have being, and it's basically, once we have it, it's eternal. It's where that being spends eternity that we're concerned about. And they say, no, there's a force underneath that we're concerned about. In other words, as I said a little bit earlier, it's the inherent and purposeless, impersonal, amoral, cosmic principle. If that phrase doesn't give you a headache, tell me and I'll try again. It's one of those kind of mind-boggling things, like what exactly does that mean? Exactly would be their response, and spending your life trying to get in touch with and harmonized with that is the purpose of Tao. So there are some basic concepts in Taoism. The first one is called non-action. That's the Chinese Wu Wei. And it wants us to understand that it doesn't imply anti-action or deliberate intervention. It's not a passive resistance. It is non-striving, flowing with the natural course of things, getting involved with the harmonious cyclical order of change and reversal. A famous picture of that would be a leaf falling from the tree and falling on the river and then floating down the river and bumping into things, but then kind of going around and getting soggy, and it's just doing what it does. Non-action. The leaf didn't do anything. A second, well, I guess that's right. There's some more here. They talk about the Wu Wei, the non-action, as excluding efforts to fight for or against something, and they see it in nature. Nature doesn't fight, it doesn't support, it doesn't resist, it doesn't do anything except be. And so that you can see when they put that kind of emphasis on nature, how having spirits in nature and all of that is really important in the understanding of the Tao. Does anybody know what this is? Is the picture clear enough that you can tell what it is?
It looks like fried chicken.
It kind of does, doesn't it? Yeah. No, it's not though.
Sorry, I haven't had dinner.
Oh, okay. Yeah. If anybody's a woodworker, that might give you a clue. It's a burl. Does anybody know what that is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a burl is where in the limb or the trunk of a tree something has burrowed into it, or there's been some kind of imperfection or a gouge, or something's happened and the tree is just kind of, okay, well, I'll just grow around that. And it when the tree is cut down, or you'll see, sometimes you'll just see these growths sticking out of the tree. It's actually quite beautiful wood. And woodworkers prize this kind of find a lot. And so that is a picture of this concept of non-action in nature for a Taoist. As a result of all of that, people are better off without extensive government or social structures. They could be called in America libertarians. Okay, although libertarians have too much structure for a true Taoist. Humans cannot conquer nature, so stop trying, would be their concept of that. And so for them, the true Taoist, education, as in the formal kind of education, only corrupts the natural goodness of people. So sitting in a classroom would be like bad news bears for a true Taoist.
Question.
Yeah.
When you say cannot conquer nature, do you mean conquer nature as in rain and wind and rivers, or conquer nature as in human nature?
Yes.
Yes.
Both. The answer is yes, both.
Yeah, the answer is yes to both. They're probably more concerned about natural phenomenon, so that they would not be into technology, electric cars and windmills and all that kind of stuff would be necessary evils to support life, but pursuing the moon would be crazy.
Okay, so if they would go around reading the Bible and God says subdue the animals and the fish and everything else,
No.
They're going, what? Why would you want to do that?
Why would you want to do that? Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So to do anything with climate change.
Oh no, that's just like, what are you talking about? Although they would push back against their own government for polluting, because that pollution is a bad thing. It's the bad side of technology, which is the attempt or the desire or the wish or the work to subdue nature. So they would be against that.
Okay.
I think communist China would be a very bad place to live if you don't like a massive government.
Totally,
Right.
totally right. And when if you know anything about the Chinese Cultural Revolution in the, what was that, the 40s, 1940s, after World War II, and Mao came into power, they burned lots and lots of Taoist material and took down a lot of shrines and re-enculturated people with communism and the whole state religion, not religion, but state way of doing things. And a lot of the people who died in that revolution were practiced Daoism in a way. And so there was a real attempt to eradicate Daoism and Confucianism out of communist China. Okay. Let's see here. How would a Taoist view learning about Taoism? They would say, yes, please, because you're trying to get in harmony with the natural, with the Tao, and that will keep you from destroying things. So they would be very much in favor of learning about it. Okay, good questions. Second concept is relativity. And that has to do with the concept that nothing is valuable in and of itself. It's only valuable as it's related to something. So the purpose and the value of something happen in relationship to something else, and judgments, therefore, about what's right and wrong are relative to one's personal stance, one's needs, one's situation, what's going on around you. And that's part of the complexity of the Tao. The third concept is called return. And that has to do, here's the symbol for that, I happen to find that. That has to do with the understanding that in true Taoism, the purpose, the goal, the events is that everything returns to its original state. And that's partly why Stephen Hawking has such a parallel with Taoism, is that He sees the universe as winding down, not gearing up. And so it's going back to its original state. Anything which develops, if I understand Hawking right, and I'm not going to say I am a scientist or a physicist, but that's what I understood part of what he had to say. Anything that comes out with a quality will inevitably revert to its opposite. So I don't know what that says about old age. I haven't quite figured that one out yet. So what's the opposite of that?
Changing diapers.
Second childhood. Okay. Yeah.
Changing diapers all over again.
Okay. Touche. Got it. All right. The concept of return says since everything comes from the Tao, it will ultimately return to the Tao. So it's more harmonious for us if we get in tune with that. The last one I believe that I was going to bring forward is called transformation, which is very much akin to reincarnation. Life is an eternal transformation from one form to another, but not in the cause effect that Hinduism especially would want us to think about, or has any kind of moral relationship. It just goes from one thing to the next. And life is an infinite process with no absolute end. And so they believe that people basically are immortal. You are immortal, I'm immortal. We'll just take different forms over the endless cycles of time. Those who experience the Tao are aware of this reality beyond a duality. And there's another one of those statements that could turn your brain into mashed potatoes. If you are experiencing even a little tiny bit of the Tao, the Taoist would say you realize that there is something beyond physical and the non-physical. It's not physical then non-physical, it's something beyond those two things. And that's the Tao. And transformation gives you opportunity to have insight into that or experiences of that. It's fair to say that in Taoism, because the cycles are endless, you will attain and then fall out of the Tao, and then you'll attain and then fall out of the Tao, and it just keeps going and going and going. And I'll let you decide if that's a good thing or not. I personally think that sounds a little tedious, but okay. For Taoists, humans are best in their natural state, just kind of weak and simple. No muscle building, no extra stuff goes with it. And for them, if you have reached old age, it shows that you've learned something about the Tao, you've become somewhat wise, and you've not ruined yourself on straining and striving. The problem for human types in Taoism is that people are not in harmony with the Tao. Just how we are, we're not that way, and suffering comes from trying to conquer nature, trying to establish artificial human organizations, i.e. government. Lao Tzu did not like government. He was not in favor of any of the dynasties or the ruling powers or wars or even urban settings. He thought those were bad news for people. So the solution for a Taoist would be that we need to return to the simple life. The fewer possessions, the better. The fewer complications, the better. Any of us who've had things go out, like Donalyn was sharing today for the third time, the back car battery is dead. Yeah, that sounds pretty appealing. Although when you get out and try to walk in the cold, maybe not so much. There's a good long life as a reward for learning to go with the flow of the Tao. People who have done that, have learned that, are usually less anxious, they say. So you get there by meditating on the one, the emptiness and the nothingness or non-being leads to union with the Tao. There's a book that was turned into a movie. The kids watched it forever. The Never-Ending Story has its basis in Taoist thinking. And so if you're interested in kind of a fun little read or a story, you can get a sense of what Taoism is in a story form by looking at that book or watching that movie. I'm sure you could probably find it somewhere on the internet. The goal of that meditation then is to internalize the energies and all of the universal pieces in Tao so that you become healthy and you have a long life. And there's some truth in the whole meditation thing. Science and medicine tell us that if you can master even the beginnings of meditation, it lowers your blood pressure, it gives you a better heart rate, it relaxes your body, you have less stress, you have less cortisol, you have all these wonderful benefits. And the Taoists would say, yes, we have known that forever. That is the kind of the very bottom basic rung in Taoism, is to learn to meditate on this the one idea. For them, the community is important in that the community embodies inaction, and by doing nothing, one has a positive effect on society. I don't know about you, but every time I read that statement or think about it, it just sort of is like sand in the cogs, because it doesn't compute. But for them, that's a basic truth. If I do nothing, society will be better.
Because I'm interfering with what's
Say again?
Yeah.
I didn't hear that.
I would think that essentially what they're saying is if they take a stand on anything, they're interfering with
Yep.
with whatever's going on.
Exactly. So Democrats and Republicans would not fit well into Taoist thinking.
Absolutely.
Ignoring your neighbors is really the best evidence of this wu-wei, this inaction. That's another contradictory statement, I apologize. But they would be much happier in Idaho than New York City.
Mm-hmm.
They would be much happier in Wyoming than Idaho. They would be happier in Nevada and Wyoming than in Colorado. They would love Alaska. Because
Where are, can you name where there are large numbers of Tao followers?
in the US?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
We can't find them.
because they're so quiet.
Well, they're
Yeah,
hiding.
that they're going to tend to be people who keep to themselves, so you're not going to know they're there.
Okay.
The practitioners of Taoism in China are going to be mostly in rural areas, because you're not the structures of society are not forced on you there.
Yeah.
There is a group that uses some of this thinking. They don't call themselves Taoists, but they're in Oregon. Patrick, you and I were talking about this once. Do you remember the name of the group in Oregon? Yeah, it's like the Friends of something or other. They're not Quakers, but it's got some kind of a funky name to it. And there's a whole community of them, and they basically, in US terminology, are hippies, old hippies. They live out in the woods, and they just don't have a lot of stuff. They probably aren't on the grid very much, and don't use technology at all if they can help it. Their Western cousins, I would say, if you want to use cousins is the strong word, but Western reflection of that would be the Amish in Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
Okay. Pretty much very simple lifestyle. They don't use much electricity. A lot of the don't use it at all. Some of the newer colonies, Amish colonies, do use a little bit of electricity, but they're very much into a community where they try to be very simple and they eat simply and they do everything from scratch and they don't believe in processing stuff. So, yeah. Okay, comments? Question?
I got a couple of comments.
Okay, please.
Okay, taking everything you say at face value and being true, then why do we have so many kung fu movies with priests and whatever of the temple of whatever learning all this fancy kung fu stuff, and then they go out and fight each other?
Not Taoists.
They're not Taoists, exactly. They would be more in the realm of the outgrowth of Confucianism and the order of things and society with order. And in order to keep the bad stuff at bay, you have to have people who are willing to fight for the good. And then you add to that a little Buddhism, and you end up with the whole concept of kung fu. And you have to separate out the difference between the Chinese version of that and the Shinto version of that. So if you've seen the movie The Last Samurai, excuse me, that's not Taoism, that's not Confucianism, that's Shinto.
Okay. My other question is, how does something like feng shui fit into this?
Oh, because objects have a harmony to them. And your job as someone trying to get in harmony with the universe is to know the flow of things. And I've now shared with you almost everything I know about feng shui. The whole understanding is that what we consider an inanimate object has some life to it. And you need to place it in relationship to other things with energy so that the energy flows. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what it is.
I'm going to talk to you about this.
A Western interior decorator would talk about being able to use a space well. That would be a sort of Western translation of feng shui. And you have to study the different inanimate objects. You have to study the flow of the universe. You have to study spiritual understandings in Tao in order to understand how you could order your home in a feng shui kind of way. Yeah.
Okay.
Good
I heard that it's really big in Hong Kong.
Oh, yes. And you can kind of understand that in places where people basically live in such very small spaces. They want it to be harmonious. They want it to be welcoming. They want it to be comfortable, that when you come into that space, it's someplace you can relax. Our church history professor in seminary was a missionary to Japan for a bunch of years. And he said those internal environments were extremely important to them because it gave them the ability to shut out all the other noise of other people when you're living, a million people to a square mile, basically, or close to that in like Tokyo and that sort of thing. And I understand, JC, you've lived in the East, in the Asian countries, so you can probably bring something else to this that would be helpful.
One thing I was thinking about as I was reading your notes today about the yin yang, everybody's familiar with the symbol of the yin yang.
Right.
The yin has a little dot of yang in it, and the yang has a little dot of yin in it. And we're all familiar with sweet and sour pork, and that's an example of that. But one thing that I found in Thailand that was really interesting was when you order lemonade, you can order it with or without salt. So they have the sweet and the salty taste mingled together. So that's the yin and the yang going on there.
Mhm.
And then years and years ago, 50 some years ago, in college, I took a philosophy of religion course. And the only thing I remember about Taoism and the I Ching was one quote. We were watching a movie, and the quote was, "Man is nature, conscious of itself."
Mm.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
And that seems like a very, it goes right along with what you've been
Mhm.
teaching us
Yeah.
this evening.
Yeah. The concepts of Taoism are pretty prevalent in the Northwest because lots and lots of people, starting in the 1840s from China, in the gold rush, and they came over to the West Coast and they brought a lot of that, and it kind of soaked into our culture. People picked up things here and there, and so it's not talked about per se as Taoism, but these concepts people have folded into their wishes, hopes, and dreams for living and life and that sort of thing. And I think it's important for us to get a handle on, or at least a basic understanding of these ideas, because they are so much a part of Northwestern culture. Maybe not quite this far inland. It's not quite as obvious, but if you pay attention when you're in a place like Seattle, Portland, or San Francisco, or Sacramento, or any of the bigger cities, there are hints, and not even hints, but just some pretty obvious ways where that comes out. I think it's there in like food and that sort of thing. That's pretty obvious, but more in the concepts of how we ought to have communities together, you'll see some of those concepts. Okay, we have about 25 minutes left, 20 minutes left. We now have a choice. I can go into Confucianism quickly, or Shinto. I think Shinto might be of more interest to you because it has so impacted American history, especially in the last 60 years, 70 years. But I will leave it as your call. If anybody wants to make a case for Confucianism, I'll do that. Everybody's practicing Wu Wei in action.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. We're quiet.
No, I'm fine with Shinto, because if that has more of an impact on our society than the other, that would be not necessarily more interesting, but maybe more valuable to learn about.
Yeah. Okay, let me do some switching here. Oops, that isn't what I thought was going to happen. Well, I'm going to flip through these slides really quick. You have the notes there, so we can, there we go. We can come back to this if we want to at a near or far point and answer any of that. There's a discussion even today about Confucianism, whether it's a religion or not. Today it feels more like a philosophy, and there are lots of people that study it as a philosophy and a way of life, to use that instead of a religion. So I'm thinking you'll probably find Shinto to be much more helpful, because this does affect not only our history, but we have such a large Japanese American culture in the Northwest that this affects them a lot. Okay, so Shinto has its early beginnings before written records, just like Taoism. And in Japan, it's called the Kami no Michi. That is translated into English as the way of the gods. And it centers around the understanding of spirits, which are for Shintoists everywhere present, everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. Wherever you're sitting right now, they would say there are kami around. And being aware of that and in tune with that is really important for them. They believe that those kami are manifestations of absolute power in the experienced world, the world that you and I would call the physical world, the phenomenal world, the world that we understand through our five senses. And the worship of the kami is what they understand is a communication between the spiritual world and the physical world. So just again, really quick, we're talking about this far right side here, the islands of Japan. And that goes all the way up, all the way down here. So there's a lot there that encompasses the Japanese islands. So Shinto has had some influence from the outside, mostly from Korea. They brought writing and books to the Japanese islands. And so that in fact affected the whole understanding of Shinto significantly. And just as an aside, I don't think I put this in the slides, but there is a real racial prejudice between the Korean people and the Japanese people even today. It's not talked about a lot, but it's there. The Korean people brought Buddhism to the Japanese islands, and that challenged the whole idea of kami and spirits and worshiping spirits, and in good animistic form, the Shintoists just folded that into their understanding of the world and religion. So they took those understandings and then began to systematize their experiences and how they described those experiences and how they talked about it, how they taught it. And so the word Shinto really is not a Japanese word, it's a Chinese word that comes from the Shinto, or the way Tao of the spirits, Shen. So just wanted to help you with that little piece. So for Japanese people, they understand that the islands of Japan are the results of the union between Izanagi and Izanami, a male and a female supernatural god type beings. And the islands themselves are the result of that union. And because Izanami died and Izanagi went in search of Izanami to reclaim her, he became ritually polluted. And therefore, out of this whole understanding comes their practice, their understanding of purification rites that play such an important role in Shinto. The tea ceremony has something to do with that. The wedding service has something to do with that. All of this purification piece goes significantly with that. Now here's the interesting part. The offspring of Izanagi and Izanami were understood to be the emperors. So the union was the islands, and the islands gave birth to the emperors. Therefore, what would we conclude about the emperors of Japan? They are gods, exactly. And that really impacts a lot of 20th century, 19th and 20th century Western, Eastern interactions. the Russo-Japanese War was in fact influenced by that. World War II was influenced by that. So it's important to get a clear understanding of that. So their worship, when Shintoists worship, they are doing this out of their understanding of the spirits. It's not a human attempt to attain a special gift or a blessing, but to share through ritual fellowship with the kami, fellowship with the spirits. The spirits can be good or evil. And so the purpose is to integrate the world of humans with the world of the spirits. That's the whole idea behind Shinto. Out of that understanding of good spirits, evil spirits, getting the worlds put together, comes the Bushido code. And this is influenced by Confucianism's Junzi, which we didn't get a chance to talk about, but it has to do with that whole concept of good and evil and order in things and protecting the systems of life together. It's influenced by Buddhist teachings of harmony and self-discipline, and it's influenced by, or not influenced, it's shown by loyalty, gratitude, courage, justice, truthfulness, politeness, reserve, honor. Men practice it as harikiri, and women practice it as, oh, I've forgotten how to pronounce this word, but the women have a way of doing that. And so harikiri is, anybody know? It's ritual,
Suicide.
yeah, ritual suicide.
Yeah, the kamikazes
Kamikaze
were
pilots do
practicing that in
right.
World War II.
Right, exactly. And it's this honor-based part of that. And so when the kamikaze pilots did that, they went through a purification process before they got in their planes. The planes went through that sort of process, ritual, I'm sorry. If you've seen any of the more current makings of movies like Pearl Harbor, they would wear these head dressings, and that had to do with the whole business of the purification and the ritual and demonstration of their loyalty to the emperor who was God. And for them, death is better than disgrace or failure. And that is still true today. It doesn't get talked about very much. I had students who came from Japan in my English classes in Montana, and they could not handle anything less than an A on their papers. They would come to me in tears. I mean, literal tears. Please let me rewrite this until I get an A. My parents will not accept this. They would make themselves physically ill over those kinds of things because it was a disgrace and it was a failure. For Japan, the whole idea of state Shinto is extremely important. Though it was present in the past, it's spread through Western influence because Western interactions made them have to explain to outsiders what they believed and why they did. And so they had to sharpen their ideas. And so the result from those kinds of disagreements and things that would go on amongst Japanese leaders would be that the leaders should be in charge and they should get to say what direction everything should go when there was a disagreement. And that ultimately was influenced by the Bushido Code of honor and respect. And when the leaders disagreed with the shogun, which was the top guy, he resigned rather than push his way around. So there was a little bit of this give and take in the state system. But that all was internal to that leader class, was all internal to them, but the emperor always got his way, always got his way. So in present day Japan, Shinto and Buddhism are often practiced together. And so if you have friends who are Japanese, they will do things that are decidedly Buddhist, but they will also do things that are decidedly Shinto, and they don't have a problem putting those two things together. So they have three forms of Shinto, and I'm not going to go into that, but just it's important to understand that they have three forms of Shinto. One's very ritualistic, one's very state-oriented, and one's very kind of family culture-oriented. And I'll show you a picture of that in just a minute. For the world for the Shintoist is good. The Japanese were created specifically for the Japanese. The gods made them for the Japanese, and foreigners will never have a complete share in their country. Ever. That's how they see it from thousands of years ago. They also believe that humans, excuse me, are the important humans are Japanese rather than all other people. So Shinto is for Japanese people. I mean, they don't go out and try to convert anybody. You're born Japanese, then you're a part of Shinto. You're not born Japanese, you're not a part of Shinto. And for them, the freedom, personal freedom is fairly limited. People come from the spirits and are potentially spirits in the making. And therefore, people are not really isolated or independent of the spirits or of each other. And people achieve or gain their highest value as they become a part of the nation. If you spent any time in Japan, you can pick that up just culturally. Somebody told me the story. They were, I was a student of mine, very fair-haired, white, almost an albino, very Swedish, Norwegian, Danish background, 6'5", and very fair skin, blue-eyed, the whole bit. And when he would walk out into public, people would practically stumble over each other to get a good look at him because he was so out of the norm. And he wasn't a part of them. He stuck out a lot. But he said that all came to an end when he would get on the public transit system, because people would just push each other to cram as many people into those cars as possible, because you're not important as an individual. It's what you do as a part of the culture, as a part of the nation that's important. So get on that subway, get out of the way and get to work. For them, the problem of being a human is if you become alienated from the culture, from the nation, from your people, from your family. If you lose honor or face, if you become ritually unclean, or if you become estranged from the family or from the kami or the ancestors or the community, that's alienation, bad news. But the solution to the problem then is reconciliation. To do these rituals, to participate in this worship, to become clean so that you can get back in harmony with the spirits is really important. And so there are these purification things that are done, these offerings that are made, these prayers that are said, heroic deeds, and ultimately, if it's bad enough, if the alienation is bad enough, suicide to make things right. For them, devotion to family and nation is more important than anything else. If you embarrass your family, if you shame your family or your community or your neighborhood or whatever, by lack of devotion or by lack of showing honor, respect to your elders. That's the worst thing you can do. If you are unethical in your behavior toward your family or your community, the kami will get you. They are in favor of everything being harmonious and people being honored, and so the kami then will take the side of the injured party. And so the rituals and the symbols for the Shintoists are pilgrimages, and they're kind of outward things to show one's devotion. And the highest place you can go is the Grand Shrine of Ise. I think I've said that right. And this is a picture of it. It's looked like this for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. It doesn't change. And it's cared for by the Shinto priests, and they're all male, there are no females. And making a pilgrimage to this place and going through the rituals is extremely important for one's becoming in harmony with the spirits. So for them, life after death is really a matter of the body being cremated so the person can join his or her ancestors. And the ancestors assist their families as kami in the journey of life. And so that's why in a true Japanese home, there's a family altar and things are done. You'll see flowers or a little bowl of rice or other little small things to ask the ancestors for help in this life journey. And in that you can see some of the influences of one type of Buddhism there. To become a kami, one of those spirits that inhabits the Japanese islands and is more than just a family ancestor. It takes time for that to happen over time. And so even as a spirit, you take some time to become the kami. So I don't know all of the details of that, but it's important to them. So that's Shinto. And any thoughts or questions about that? Again, I feel like I'm giving you a fire hydrant to drink out of.
You know, one interesting aside is our US media, when they cover, you know, historically, like in the last 50 years, when a prime minister, for example, in Japan resigns and bows and they're in disfavor and they're apologizing to the entire thing and they're taking ownership of what they've done, that's so contra to our belief system about politics in general. But really the Shinto philosophy and the Buddhist philosophy almost completely explains why these incredibly high-ranking leaders go through that almost embarrassing, interview in front of a camera, in front of a microphone. It's pretty mind-boggling. You wouldn't see that happen here.
Yeah.
To the point, Rick, that they will kill themselves.
Yes.
Yeah, they'll drop on the sword, essentially.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's where that phrase came from. You know, fall on your sword came out of Shinto.
Wow.
There's a little bit of that understanding of the shame honor culture in the Middle East too, and we'll talk about that as we move into that. If you're interested in a fascinating movie about all of that, I think the name of it is called The Emperor or Emperor, but it's about Douglas MacArthur when he became the marshal for Japan right after World War II. And the opening scene is absolutely just mind-boggling because the streets are lined with Japanese people. And he's going down the street with his aide-de-camp in the car and, all these people. As the car comes to where they're at, they do a snap turn and turn their back on him.
Wow.
As a Westerner, that says one thing to us. But what they meant by that was something completely different. And I'm not going to spoil it. So if you want to know more, you got to go watch the movie.
Okay.
I gotta, you know, I know when we get to MacArthur, you know, can't imagine any general doing this today. But in a way, he understood the psychology of warfare in the sense that the total surrender meant the emperor had to deny his godhood.
Exactly.
And I couldn't see any of our presidents having a backbone to tell anybody that these days,
No.
much
no.
less somebody who's just a general.
Right. Right.
But in terms of defeating people, he knew that defeating them militarily wasn't the job.
Exactly.
He had to defeat them psychologically.
Yeah.
And he drove the sword in.
He had to. And I think, I don't know that I'm entirely right on this, but I think Truman understood that as well. That's why he dropped the bombs,
Mhm.
because he knew, one, it would cost so many more lives to just do traditional warfare, but
Mhm.
that would not have left the Japanese people to confront the godness of their emperor.
Right. And then another thing he did for the next month, he flew entire platoons of airplanes over every major city at as low as they could go.
Mm,
And they did that. They weren't dropping bombs or anything.
No.
They were just showing, we are strong.
Mhm,
We are strong. We
mhm.
are stronger than you can imagine.
Yeah.
Think about how strong we are because we're coming back tomorrow.
Right.
I mean, it was totally a psychological demoralization
Mhm.
kind of warfare. And it worked.
Yeah.
It's almost as if MacArthur was a student of Shinto
Yes.
and understood the entire psychological, spiritual, emotional, the whole being behind the
Mhm.
Japanese.
Mhm. Yeah.
That'd be a whole interesting different subject.
I think you read The Art of War by Sun Tzu or whoever that
Mhm,
was.
mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
You were talking about how they were really isolationist and didn't accept foreigners. Earlier, for centuries and centuries, there were some people in the far north on one of those islands that starts with H, either Hokkaido or Honshu, and they were called the Ainu people. And they were terrifically discriminated against. I mean,
Yeah.
just horrifically discriminated against. And I'm not sure why, but I think it's because of kind of the juxtaposition of where they were
Mhm.
in the country. But it was only in this century that I think they got some sort of retribution or recognition.
Mhm.
So they really are isolationist.
Yeah. I want to spend just a couple of minutes saying, so what? How does this, all of these interesting, insightful, hopefully, things help us when we talk with people who are either interested in this or come out of that background? And I think there's at least two things that we need to keep in mind. One is for people who have Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism, or Shinto as part of their heritage, their culture, joining joining the church is a very difficult proposition.
Mhm.
Becoming a Christian, maybe not quite as much, but joining a church, big deal. Because if their family's like, ooh, you're a traitor, you're rejecting us, something as minor as we disagree with you, that the whole internal being of those folks just turns into mush. And so we've got to be gentle with them. Patrick.
Okay. Even when I was working with immigration, it was pretty much now kind of standard knowledge that when someone did marry a Japanese person, they could become a citizen, you know, real quickly, but they did not become a citizen until their parents died.
Right.
And for some of that same reason,
Mhm.
if you're supposed to be, you know, one of the chosen
Mhm.
Japanese, most, you know, highly exalted people on earth, Why are you giving up your citizenship and going to some inferior citizenship? And so if the parents were really into that,
Right.
I mean, so we had people becoming citizens, you know, practically in 70s and 80s year old. And they said, well, you know, I waited until my parents died, and then it was just had to wait until I got around to it. And it's important to my grandkids now. But I mean, they're in no rush to become citizens.
Right.
I mean, they're good people. I mean, they're good residents and everything, but I mean, they're good citizens. They're just not citizens.
Right. And so because they have to reject so much of what's tied up for them in family and honor and respect and
Ancestors.
and all of
Well,
that.
but it's also a matter of law.
Exactly.
Because if they became a citizen of the United States, they also will not inherit anything from their parents.
I didn't know that.
So if they want a piece of the action from the family farm, they have to be Japanese citizens.
Yeah. Wow.
So I mean, it's pretty deep.
It is. And so as we interact with them, as we have friendships with them, we need to keep that in the back of our minds, that becoming a Christian isn't just, oh, I've met Jesus, I love Jesus, boom. There's way more to it for them. They have to give up. And the consequences are huge. If the stronger their family is into any of those religious, cultural things for them. Because you're embarrassing the family by turning your back on us. And there's nothing, you can't do anything worse than embarrass your family in their cultures. You just can't. You know, you could kill somebody and it's better than embarrassing your family. If the reasons for killing were justifiable, you know, in some way in the family thinking. If you have friends that are either into that, or especially if they're of Chinese or Japanese descent, we need to recognize that's been bred into them. Before they could talk, it was bred into them. Before they could rationalize it, it was bred into them. It's something we have to extend grace with.
Patty, are we going to talk at all about New Age movement? Does any of this fit into those?
Yes. New Age is basically I want to say this nicely, I'm not coming up with the right word. It's basically the taking of what the smorgasbording, it's not a word, but smorgasbording of Buddhism and Taoism and maybe a little Shinto thrown in for good, and maybe some Hinduism, and bringing it over into Western, what we palate, what we can tolerate. Yeah. Crystals, you know, that's all part of that.
You know, it's really, as another aside, it's really interesting to see what some of the Eastern Oriental religions, all 3 or 4 of the major ones, when some of their disciples come to the West, like the US, they turn it into an economic gold mine for whomever is the leader, or whatever you want to call this guy. I mean, I sold mobile homes to the Rajneesh, and it just blew my mind. The millions of dollars that flowed into Antelope, Oregon, because of this one guy from India that wrote all of these books, and you couldn't even speak to him. He was just a figure, a godlike figure that everybody accepted. When I say everybody, but I think human nature, we tend to look for solutions, and when these soothsayers provide it, all heck breaks loose. It's pretty weird, but when you look at the stuff we've been studying from the East, I think we picked some of those basic principles, out of each entity, whether it's, going back to our first session, you grab some of this, and like Pat O'Kelly pointed out, the Shintos, that they became kamikazes, they became the samurai.
Mhm.
And so now you can justify the warlike aspect of it to enforce whatever that little belief system is.
Right.
And it's really weird how it comes together, because we tend to westernize all of this information.
Mhm.
And as such, we're not separating out the basic philosophy.
Yeah, it's kind of what, Dr. Laura would always, she was pretty popular 15 or 20 years ago, and she would say, if you're going to be a Buddhist, be a Buddhist, but don't try to be a Buddhist and a Jew,
Yeah, exactly.
because you
good
can't do
point.
that. You can't do that. You're just being schizophrenic. But like I said last week or the week before, what we're really seeing when people in like the US or Europe or whatever gravitate towards some of these things, it's really telling us that they're looking for something: harmony, peace, satisfaction, belonging, any of those things, and they haven't found it in whatever they've been involved in before. So now these other things provide a path that seems to have some more kind of hope to them.
Yeah, we should just give every one of those people a Bible.
Yeah. If they could understand it when they read it. Exactly.
If it would be that simple.
Yeah,
But
at the end of the day, it
Bible does
probably
speak for
is.
itself. There have been lots of people who've read the Bible and found Christ, and I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to say anything bad about that, because I think it does work. So we're at 10 after the hour, so I don't want to overdo our time. Are there prayer requests, things you want to lift up? I think Devin has a celebration, don't you?
Well, we got to sign our final documents for closing the house in Iowa. Went to overnight it and found out I missed the overnight, but that's okay. It'll be there by Friday, and it all should be said and done very quickly here. So
Praise the
definitely keep
Lord.
that
Very good. Yeah.
Cool.
praise and prayer until the cash is in the bank.
Mhm.
That's awesome.
You've been very patient.
Been a year and a half, and I'm never praying for patience again.
Mhm.
Yeah, be careful what you pray for.
That's right. That's right. Anybody else?
We could pray for Christine.
Oh, yes. Okay. That's good. All right. Well, would someone like to close us in prayer? Next week, I believe we are going to talk about Judaism.
Yay.
We'll move from East to Middle East next week.
I need to say just one thing. What this is bringing to me, before we close out here, what this is bringing to me is that it makes me wonder how much we really, when we're working with our foreign countries in the State Department, how often do we really take in consideration their beliefs like this, their religious beliefs? Because some of the things that we do with foreign affairs does not appear to me to take into consideration their beliefs.
I think that's a fair statement. I think it's getting better in the more current years, but I think we have done things, whether it was willful or unwillful ignorance. I don't make a judgment here, but we certainly did things out of some kind of ignorance in the past, for how we treated people in other countries. Definitely.
Right.